In this nugget, we conclude our discussion of group policy objects with WMI filtering and loopback processing. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, in our last nugget, we said that we would continue our discussion here in this nugget of processing adjustments. We'll start here with WMI filtering, and instead of covering it later, I'll cover it now. With WMI filtering, the basic idea here is, first of all, WMI stands for Windows Management Instrumentation, and it's a little bit more of a programmatic kind of a function that most general domain admins, for example, don't usually mess with. This is something that normally a developer would have more knowledge of and things, but it is still useful for us. For example, one of the functions of WMI is it can query for nearly any kind of computer property, just about anything that's there. It can see whether or not it has a modem. It can see whether or not it has a network card. If it does have a network card, how fast the network card is. If it has specific brands of different kinds of hardware vendors, for example. Other things that it can query for would be, again, just nearly anything, but the amount of memory it has. The amount of the CPU that it has, the operating system involved. So, for example, maybe these things would be very useful because maybe we want to install some software, but only if it has at least 4 gigs of RAM because it's a memory-hungry application. And only if it's at least a dual-core CPU because it uses a lot of CPU. And only if it's, I don't know, Windows Vista or later because it's designed for more current operating systems. So those would be a good example of queries that I might group together. You don't have to pick one or the other of all of these. You can set up a combination of something if you want to and apply that. You can also say it's got to have at least this service pack, quick fix engineering, or update as well. Maybe there's some kind of an update or a service pack or something that makes the application that you want to install compatible, or whatever the function is. Okay, so you can have any number of reasons for all of this. You can specify a version of the BIOS if you want to. You can say apply this to only portable computers. That might be useful if you have something that relates, for example, to slow links or to VPNs, and it would be something that would apply only to portable computers, and it wouldn't make sense to apply some kind of a VPN policy or something relating to remote functions to a desktop computer. You apply the filter only one time. In fact, you'll see in the UI here in a moment, you can only pick one. But the filter can have many criteria, like I said before. It can be, several different criteria, such as the RAM, CPU, operating system, all that kind of stuff. Do be aware of the fact that it might slow down older computers, because what happens is when the computer is starting up and it's looking for WMI criteria, it looks at itself and says, do I have enough RAM? Do I have enough CPU? Do I have the right operating system? It asks itself all these questions. It's probably not too big of a deal on more current computers with quad-core processors and all that sort of thing. But if you especially have very complex WMI filtering, it could have some effect on it. So by way of example, here I'm going to go to my domain controller, and you can see that I've taken this lock the taskbar group policy object, and I've linked it up here to the nuggetlab.com domain. This means then that by order of inheritance, or scope of management as we also call it, it'll flow down to my domain controllers. So we can see here that I've applied a WMI filter. Now let's pause there and go to the WMI filters. To create a WMI filter, you right-click it and choose New. Now, how do you know what to enter in here? Because you click on Add, and then you just start typing stuff. How do you know what in the world you're supposed to type? There's lots of different resources out there. You can Google for all different kinds of criteria, but I've already pre-packaged and pre-created one for us here, just so that we can have something that we can work with. And in this case, for example, what it's telling us is this is a namespace. You get namespaces that you pull from for this, and I'm telling it to select star, in other words, anything from a Windows 32 operating system. Now that doesn't mean it's a 32-bit operating system. That's just a common descriptor for Windows operating systems. Where the version is like, actually this is kind of hard to read, isn't it? Let me open this up like this. Where the version is like version 6.3. If you do a WinVer on Windows 8.1 or Windows Server 2012 R2, it'll return to you the version of the operating system is 6.3. And what this is saying is I want it to be 6.3 or greater, for example, in order for this policy to apply. This means then that it would not apply to 6.2, which would be Windows 8.0 or Windows Server 2012 or Windows Vista or anything else that's older. And the product type is 1. Now, what's product type? Product type 1 is a client operating system. So in other words, again, this would have applied up here to a Server 2012 machine. But since I said product type 1, that's a client operating system like Windows 8.1. So now it won't apply to my servers. And if I wanted it to apply to my servers, I can also put in a 2, which would be domain controllers, or a 3, which would be any kind of a server. Okay, so we would have those options there as well. But anyway, let me cancel out of all of that. I've already pre-created that, like I said. Now, the next thing I did, though, was I went to, like I showed you here, my lock the taskbar item, and you can pick from the drop-down list where it says to apply only to Windows 8.1. Now, on this domain controller, where I've got the GPMC open, we can see that I can right-click here and lock the taskbar, or not lock the taskbar, and I can fiddle around with this like I want to, okay? That's because it won't apply to this computer since it's a Server 2012 R2, which is the right version. Again, if we go to WinVer here, we see that indeed it's a 6.3, but it's not the product type of 1, which is a client operating system. Like here, we have a client operating system of product type 1. So now you can see that the group policy object has applied here because I can't change the lock the taskbar thing. And I'm logged on as an administrative account. I'm the Phoenix Admin 01. Which is a member of domain admins and a local administrator here. So that's how WMI filtering works. It can be very creative with it and very granular and specific. But once again, you can really go down a hole there when you start to work with that, and you get very, very granular in your policy settings. So again, wherever possible, use the normal order of inheritance instead of using special exceptions like this if possible. Now let's take a look here at loopback processing. There's two different kinds. There's merge mode and replace mode. And for that, let me just kind of diagram up here. We have a computer. Now what happens is the computer, when it starts up, it reads its policies, right? Computer configuration policies. And then as processing goes on, then we have a user here. And the user logs on, and the user policies are processed. And then what happens after that is we just get the result, okay, of computer and user, right? Now the thing that continues on though with loopback processing is it doesn't stop there, okay? So we don't have that step quite yet. What happens is the computer comes back on and says, hey, I'm a user. I'm going to put in parentheses out here, user. It pretends to be a user. And the computer will read any user-side policies. And then, as a result of that, it will have the computer-side policies that it read initially. It'll have the user-side policies that it read here. And then it will, again, apply user-side policies, but it's actually the computer that read those policies. Now, why in the world would we want to do something like that? A good example of this is where the users, maybe even their administrators, and we want even administrators to be subject to certain user policies. We don't want them to use their privilege to override things. So even though if we were to stop right here, they might have a privilege here to be able to change certain things because of their position or whatever. But here we want to continue on down and still have the computer read the policies again, but instead of reading the computer side policies, it reads the user side policies and forcibly applies them. And this makes sense with how policies are applied, because the policy that wins is the last one that was read. So we read some here, that was first, and we read some here, that was second, we read some here, that was third, and so since those were read last, those are the ones that apply. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we actually make this work as well. And for that, I've simply gone here to the domain where I've created and linked a new group policy object called company wallpaper. If we look at the policy itself, we can see that under the desktop setting here, that we are forcing company wallpaper because we spend a lot of money to make this work, and we want everybody to use the company wallpaper without any variance. And now this is really just a policy at this point, and it's applying to the domain, but that doesn't mean that anybody couldn't change this. Okay, they could change this at this point. So, for example, if we go to policies here now, and if we want to alter that so that the people can't change it, then we go into our administrative settings. Then we would go down to system, and then group policy. Wherein is it? There it is. Group policy, and this is where we would configure our loopback policy processing. Oh, I always have the hardest time finding this. Where is it? Configure user, there it is, a configure user group policy loopback processing mode. And I'm going to enable this, and right now I'm going to just use merge mode, but I'll talk about replace mode here coming up. So then we'll just click OK. Alright, now what's going to happen is, even if you're an administrator or something like that, you still will not be able to make any changes. So next thing I'm going to do is go over to my computers, log off and log back on, and refresh the policy again, and we'll see what happens. And you can see here I've logged back on again. I go to my desktop to view the company wallpaper that everyone insists we use here. And voila, but there it is. Something about this just doesn't look right. I can't quite put my finger on it. Okay, so anyway, there we have it now. That's mandatory wallpaper. In fact, even if I go to personalize here and go to desktop background, I could, looks like I could change things. Let's do this. Let's make it faster. If I go to lines and colors, for example, that gives you architectures and stuff like that. Flowers. I keep clicking stuff, and yet nothing ever changes here. Okay, so that's again because of this loopback processing mode. Oh, let me talk to you about the other thing here. I forgot to mention this. What about the replace mode? Remember, we're using merge mode right now. That's what this is. This whole process is merge mode. If you use replace mode, it takes out the user entirely, and the user gets none of their setting, and it's only the computer that applies both the computer and the user settings. In this nugget, we concluded our discussion of group policy objects, and we took a look at WMI filtering, which is a great way to narrow down very specifically group policy objects that apply only to a certain set of circumstances. And then we also looked at loopback processing as well. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.